All right, I think we are live. So hello everyone and welcome to this webinar on joyfully and naturally homeschooling your children. I'm Candace Cornelius. I'm going to be your host today. And so what we're going to do is in just a minute here, I'm going to click over to a screen share and I'm going to give you this presentation. I'm going to try and add lots of value to you today in this next hour because I want to teach you as much as I possibly can about joyfully and naturally educating your children at home. Because this is an absolute passion of mine. It's something that brings me so much joy and that I love to do. And that I remember when I first started, I didn't have a lot of help and I didn't know a lot of people. And I would have loved to have someone just, sit down with me for an hour and just teach me. So that's what I want to do with you here today. So we're going to click over to that. And then at the end, that presentation, I have a really special bonus for you that I don't want you to miss out on. So stick around to the end, and we're going to be doing the live Q&A session. So I am so glad that you're here, and let's begin. Let's talk about joyfully and naturally educating our kids at home. So give me just a sec. All right, I hope you guys can see this. So here it says joyfully and naturally homeschooling with Candace Cornelius. That is moi. All right, so I want to begin by telling you what to expect. We're going to go really quickly today because there's so much that I want to teach you. So in the very beginning, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I want you to get to know who I am and where I'm coming from. And then, like I said, we have that special bonus at the very end and the live Q&A session. So make sure to stick around to the very end. This thing is just going to be power-packed and you're not going to want to miss a bit. So let me start by telling you my journey to joyfully and naturally educating my children, because this is not a direction or road I had ever planned on taking for myself. So here is a picture of my husband and I when we got married. Now this actually was not too long after I had graduated from public high school. I had gone to public school K through 12, in a big city, and I actually really thrived in public school. And homeschooling was not anything I had on my radar. It was something that my husband had briefly brought up, and I hadn't really thought much about it. Now, it wasn't until after we were married, he had brought it up before we got married. Now, after we were married, his aunt was interested in homeschooling her children, and she started telling us about it, and I thought it was the strangest thing ever. I was like, why on earth would she want to homeschool her kids? And they're going to be weird, right? And so I was listening to her and I decided to, have an open mind and listen to some of her reasons. And it started really making sense to me. And I just became so intrigued by the idea and I started studying it. And it was amazing to me because before this time, I hadn't really thought there was a way to educate someone besides going to school. Like, I knew homeschooling existed, but really to me in my life, if you were to learn and be educated, that happened by going to school and doing school kind of work. Reading textbooks, taking tests, doing workbooks, listening to lectures. To me, that was learning. And since then, I have learned a great deal, and that you don't need that kind of school setting in order to learn an abundance of knowledge and so much about yourself and to learn skills. And so I started being really intrigued by this idea of homeschooling. Now, at the time, I was in college and I had not declared my major yet. And I had decided that this is what we wanted to do for our family. My husband and I, we were going to homeschool our kids. We knew we wanted children. And so I got a degree in family and education. Now, this is not something you have to do. You do not need a bachelor's degree in family education to homeschool your children. It's something I did, and I learned some great stuff from it, but that's, why I'm here. I want to share with you the things that I've learned because I learned some at school and I also learned a ton elsewhere. I was able to read tons of blogs. I've read books about principles of great education, I've been able to talk to other homeschoolers. I've been able to sit in, during their day. They've welcomed me into their home and let me just observe what it's like when they homeschool their children. I have, read academic journals, peer-reviewed articles about homeschoolers, how they turn out, and I have just been so consumed and passionate about this idea of education and how we can give our child a phenomenal education. So that's what I want to walk through with you today. Now, after I declared my major, we decided this is what we're going to do. We welcomed our first child into our family. And so this is my first daughter. And after that, we added another little girl here, and she's about 2 years old. And we also have a beautiful newborn in our home today. So I am the proud mother of just 3 little princesses who I have been homeschooling since the very beginning. And I tell you what, there's nothing I would rather do. And it just brings me so much joy, and learning just happens so naturally in our home. And I want you to experience that same thing. So I want to tell you some things that I discovered while I was studying education and as I've been actively homeschooling my family. I discovered that so much learning can occur without the conventional school model. And that model includes force, grades, this predetermined curriculum, testing, busy work, textbooks, workbooks, and strict age groupings. I found that many of these things benefit the institution far more than they benefit the child. I learned that education can be freedom-based. You can have so much freedom in what you learn and how you learn. That education can be this joyful event that happens in your life. It can occur naturally. It doesn't have to be forced. It can be fun, and it's multidisciplinary. If you learn one subject, or one big idea, if you have one big interest, say, who knows, maybe your kid's interested in dinosaurs, you're going to learn so many different subjects within that interest because real life is multidisciplinary. You're going to learn about geography when you're studying dinosaurs, reading, arithmetic, geology, history. So many different subjects are going to be covered, right? And that education can be fulfilling. It can be so fulfilling in our hearts and in our souls when we learn and we're passionate about what we're learning about. Now, some people have some really common concerns about leaving the traditional school model of education. So I want to go over them with you, and I want you to, pay attention and see if any of these resonate with you. Parents often ask, do I know enough? Is it hard? Will I get tired of being with my kids all day? Will my kids be weird? Because every homeschooler I knew growing up was weird, right? We hear that one all the time. Shouldn't I leave it to people who have a degree in education? If I let my kids follow their interests, what if they don't learn, X, Y, or Z, but my kids won't listen to me? How do I teach things that I don't remember? Is it going to be a lot of planning? And how will I know what they need to learn? So I want to ease your mind a bit and address some of these concerns and explain in detail one important step to providing a joyful and natural education. Because what I've found is that there are 7 key steps to doing this. After years of study and just being so, just engaged in learning about education and how it can occur naturally and joyfully, I found that there are 7 main things that you need. Now, I do not have time to go into all that with you. I wish I could, but I simply don't. So what I decided to do today was to step into one of those steps and to just start digging into that with you. So that's what we're going to do today. And again, stick around to the end where I'm going to do the live Q&A and give you some special bonuses. So the one crucial step that we're going to talk about to developing a joyful and natural education for your young child is allowing your child to pursue their own interests. Now, when I say this, what I mean is exclusively allowing your child to study what he or she is interested in, rather than following the conventional school model that forces children to take tests, listen to lectures, read textbooks, do busy work and workbooks, all about things that they are not interested in. okay? So this is so important, and I'm going to go through, the benefits of taking this approach and how it contributes to this joyful and natural learning experience. Because I can tell you this works. My children, they love learning and they learn naturally all the time. And this can happen for you, but you just have to put in some of these steps. And so letting them exclusively follow their interests is one of them. Now, one reason this is so important is because it provides relevance to the child. I want to give you an example by telling you about an experience that I had in high school. Now, when I was in high school, I was super concerned about getting into the best college possible. And so my senior year, I decided to take this advanced to chemistry IB course, right? It was completely optional. Only myself and maybe about 10 other students who were super gung-ho, like I was, about getting into a top college took this course because we were trying to do everything possible to impress college admissions officers. I did not take this course because I was passionate about chemistry or because I really cared about chemistry, because in fact, chemistry meant nothing to me. I didn't have the least bit interest in chemistry, and I was purely taking it to get a good grade and put that I took this challenging course and try to impress colleges, right? I had gone through years of studying chemistry, and I was just trusting my teachers that what they were saying was true. I really didn't even know if these things existed. We were learning about electron orbitals, and I was just thinking, I can't see these things. I don't know that they're real. I am just trusting my teacher that they say they're real, and I'm going to do what I have to do to pass the test so I can get a good grade, so I can go on to college and do things that I really actually care about. So chemistry had no relevance to me, okay? And it wasn't until that senior year that it began to have meaning. Because at the beginning of that class, our teacher decided that what we were going to study was medications. Now, we were going to start out studying really common medications like Tylenol and ibuprofen. And suddenly, I was intrigued. This was meaningful to me. I had taken these medications before. They were sitting on my shelf at home. I had felt them work within my body, and now we were going to break them down into their chemical parts and, see how they do what they do. And suddenly, this was exciting for me. This is the first time that chemistry ever was real to me and that I was interested in it. And so after this initial excitement, I had a couple of thoughts. The first one was I was really sad for all of my other classmates because, like I said, this was a very small class. And I thought about all of my other classmates who had gone up to learn chemistry, K through 12, and had stopped learning it before it ever became relevant to them. That they had stopped where I was before, when chemistry was meaningless to them. It was only a means to an end to get a good grade. They didn't care in the least bit about what they were learning. And it just wasn't relevant in their lives. And I thought, how sad that they're going to end their high school career and have chemistry mean nothing. After years and years of study, it wasn't relevant to them. And then my next thought was, why in the world did they teach me this way? Why did they start out with these abstract concepts before getting to something concrete? Why not have started with something that was of interest to me, that was tangible in my life, and then let's break it down into its chemical parts. Let's break it down from there. Why not study things in their natural context, things I can touch and feel and that have meaning to me, and then break them down, okay? Now, we as homeschoolers have the unique opportunity to do this. When we let our children pursue their interests in a way that's meaningful to them, suddenly what they're learning becomes relevant to them. They're able to make connections between this new knowledge and their previous knowledge. They're able to bridge gaps there, and that helps it to stick in their memory longer, and it becomes really relevant to them. Furthermore, when they learn things that interest them, they are more engaged. Isaac Asimov said, self-education is, I firmly believe, the only kind of education there is. Now, this is so important. We want our children to be these self-directed learners. We want them to take responsibility for their education, take responsibility for what they're learning, and not put that responsibility on someone else. Not blame other people when they aren't learning, because really self-education is the only kind of education there is. I want to give you a quick example. Think about Spanish and French. So in American schools, most students study Spanish or French, right? For probably at least 2 years. Lots of people start in junior high and then they study their freshman, junior, sophomore, junior, and senior year. A lot of students have studied French or Spanish for 6 years, right? They've done countless exercises and workbooks and listened to lectures and then all these things, sat in for hours and hours and hours and hours of the Spanish and French instruction, right? This is most of the American population. I'm sure you would agree. Now, I want you to think about it. So how many people who didn't already, Spanish or French wasn't their native language, their parents didn't speak it, now they just went through school and learned these things, how many of them actually know Spanish or French? Because you would think after all of these hours and hours we force kids to learn these languages, that our country would just be full of these French and Spanish, maybe some German speakers who just speak, fluently. They've had years and years of study. But they don't. Most American adults can, ask where the bathroom is, they can count to 10, they can say another handful of phrases, and that's about it. Because education is self-education. It doesn't matter how much we try and force someone to learn something, that learning is the individual's responsibility. It's up to them if they're going to learn it. You can try and force someone to sit into a classroom, but if they are engaged in taking responsibility for their learning, they're just not going to learn it. So we want our children to be engaged. We want them to become these self-directed learners and take their learning on themselves, to make it their responsibility. And when we allow them to exclusively study things that interest them, they're able to do this. If English or another language, Spanish or Japanese or French is an interest of them, suddenly they're going to want to learn that because that's something they want to learn. And they're going to work really hard at it, right? They're not going to just do the bare minimum to get an A. I've heard of educators saying their frustration when kids just ask, okay, what do I need to do to get an A? Because they want to do the least amount possible, right? Because they're not so concerned about learning, but they're really concerned about our grades, okay? And we want to switch that. We want our kids to be more concerned about learning. I want them to think, how can I learn how to conjugate these verbs better? How can I improve my accent? Instead of what do I need to do to get an A in this class, okay? Now, furthermore, when we allow them to pursue their interests in this way, they experience joy. They grow to love learning. They discover that learning doesn't have to be dull, it doesn't have to be hard, and they become lifelong learners. Now, these are things that we really want for our children. We want them to learn throughout their lives because they love it. We want them to find joy in learning, because it doesn't have to be this dull, boring experience. It can be very engaging and exciting and fulfilling for the individual. Now let's talk about memory. Leonardo da Vinci said, "Just as eating contrary to the inclination is injurious to the health, so study without desire spoils the memory and it retains nothing it takes in." Oh, I love that. I'm going to read it one more time. Just as eating contrary to the inclination is injurious to the health, so study without desire spoils the memory and it retains nothing that it takes in. What wise words. When we study without desire, we aren't retaining these things, right? We might be taking them in, but we are not retaining them. Now, I can tell you from my personal experience, and I imagine if you've gone to public education, you can testify to this, that we often learn and memorize all these facts for a test, and once the test is over, we quickly forget. Because study without desire, it spoils the memory, and it just doesn't retain the information. Now, research has taught us that when we are emotionally connected to something, we remember it better. So I want you to think back to an experience that you had that was high in emotion. Maybe this is when you got married, when your first child was born, maybe you had a near-death experience, or maybe this is when you learned of a terrorist attack. Now, chances are you have a lot of memory about these events and that these were times that were high in emotion. I remember a lot of details from when I got married. I remember a lot of details from when my first child was born. I know exactly where I was sitting, in which room I was sitting when I heard about the 9/11 terrorist attacks. I know where I was in proportion to the TV. I remember thoughts that I was having. I have a very clear image and very specific memories are ingrained in my mind because this was a time that was very high in emotion. And when we can let our children have these learning experiences that are high in emotion, that give them joy, that they're full of curiosity and joy and excitement, they are going to remember these things better. Now, there's a book, you can get it on Amazon, The Handbook of Emotion and Memory, Research and Theory. And this goes into a lot of detail about this connection between emotion and memory. So if you want to, dig into that more, you're welcome to go and check that out. So I want you to take a look at this picture. It kind of breaks my heart because I feel like this picture is the reality for a lot of American families. I just look at this little child, or kind of a middle-aged child, and I can just see her just telling her mom, why does this matter? Why do I need to know this? Why do I need to do this? When am I ever going to use this, right? I remember hearing that all the time in high school. I'm sure I said it myself, as students would say, when am I ever going to use this? Because what they were learning didn't interest them. They weren't choosing this to be taught these things. These were ideas being forced upon them that were not relevant to their lives. And so when that happens, we naturally rebel because humans naturally desire freedom. We want freedom over our days and how we spend our time and what we do. And this mom, who's well-meaning, she just wants her child, the best for her child. And the only way she knows is that, her kid has to do her homework. And it's just this struggle because if you push on a human being, they're naturally going to push back. And that's what happens to our children when we try and force them to study all of these things that don't interest them, that aren't relevant to their lives, that aren't meaningful to them. And in order to do that, you have to force it upon them. And so in America, we have all these ways to force them to do it, right? It's illegal for them not to go to school. They can go to court, truancy court, if they aren't going to school. We have all of these consequences, all of these punishments and incentives and so many things to try and force them to do things that they don't want to do and taking that freedom away from them. But when we allow them to pursue their own interests, we are able to remove a lot of this contention and to bring more harmony and peace in the home. And as a homeschooler, you have a unique opportunity to really strengthen relationships in your family in a really special way because you're going to be spending so much time with your children. And so we want this to be really meaningful time, and we want you to have these solid relationships. Because, at the end of the day, when you're at the end of your life, what's really going to mean a lot to you is the relationships you have with your family, right? So we want to try to avoid this rebellion and contention and help bring more peace in the home and strengthen these relationships. Now, Plato said this. He said, "Do not train children in learning by force and harshness, but direct them to it by what amuses their minds, so that you may be better able to discover with accuracy the peculiar bent of the genius of each." I love this. Do not train children in learning by force and harshness, but direct them to it by what amuses their minds, so that you may be better able to discover with accuracy the peculiar bent of the genius of each. So when we do this, we let them discover their unique genius. By giving them this time to learn by what amuses their mind, they're able to discover their God-given talents and their mission in life, how they can give a meaningful contribution to the world. Because that's something I want my children to know. that they can give a very meaningful contribution to the world, that they have talents given to them by God, and that they have their own unique genius. They can do things in a way that no one else can. So furthermore, when we allow this kind of education to occur, we are rejecting conformity, right? The conventional school model, or what's sometimes called the conveyor belt model of education, it pushes conformity and it punishes those that reject it. But when we can embrace this truth, okay, that kids learn different things at different times and in different ways, then we can stop comparing kids, and you can stop worrying, because everyone is unique, right? And most people can agree with that children are different. But yet we continue to put them in these school systems that force children to learn the same things at the same times and in the same ways, when children are so different. And we tell kids not to compare themselves, right? Don't compare yourself to someone else. Be happy with who you are, right? Yet we put them in these institutions where they compare children all day. They compare student to student, by their grades and their performances, and then classroom students to one classroom of students to determine who's a better teacher, and then schools to schools, districts to districts, states to states, countries to countries, and these are all based on, these children, and we're doing all this comparing of them. But when we really embrace that children learn different things at different times and in different ways, we can stop all that comparing, and we can stop trying to fit children, into these molds, and try to determine who they're going to be, instead of letting them discover, their uniqueness. Who are they? Let them discover who they are, instead of us trying to put them in, this peg. So, our society, it needs all professions to function. Right now, there's a trend in education to push STEM careers, right? We want our kids to all be scientists and engineers and to work with computers. And so, the STEM idea is being pushed really, really, really hard right now. And in a way, they're trying to make everyone go into these STEM careers, when that's not where everyone needs to go. We're not all going to be in technology, and our society won't be able to function properly if everyone is interested in that, because we need musicians, we need artists, we need actors and photographers, we need people who are interested in, midwifery and in botany, and all these different things that make a whole society, right? So why not let our children discover how they are going to give their meaningful contribution to the world in their own unique way? And when we allow them to pursue their own interests, they're able to discover that. Now, furthermore, schools kind of force this mediocrity on children. They come out knowing a little bit about a lot of different things, and they are just very mediocre, and they're masters at nothing. They don't really have skills. Despite being in school for 12 years, they don't have skills to get a good paying job, despite 12 years of schooling, and despite the fact that they want to, they're doing more and more homework and they want to lengthen the school day, they still come out and they're not prepared for a real job, a career yet. And so they just come out knowing just a little bit about lots of things, and they're very mediocre. But we have the opportunity to help them to become masters at different things. I've been watching the Olympics, and Simone Biles is this gymnast who's just phenomenal, right? And she was homeschooled. And because she was homeschooled, she has become a master at gymnastics. She was able to spend so much of her time pursuing her unique God-given talents and perfecting her skills. And now she's contributing to a way that is inspiring people all over the world, right? And so your child can do that. Your child may not be an Olympian, but there is something that they can do. And if we can give them time to pursue those passions and really discover what's inside of them, they can become a master at something and not just come out and live their lives being these mediocre people. Now, I have this question proposed to me once, and it was, could our society produce a Newton or a Mozart? And I had to think really hard about that. And it reminds me kind of this Simone Biles example. If Mozart was in our schooling system today, and he had such limited freedom on how he spent his day and what he spent his time studying, and you think about how much music instruction is allowed to a kid during a school day, would he have become such a master in music? Would he have been able to bless the world in such a meaningful way? And I just want you to think about that with, this push for conformity and how we allow children, how much freedom we allow them. Could we have a Newton or Mozart today? So when you communicate, when you let your kids pursue their interests, what you're doing is you're communicating to them that they matter. You're letting them know that, hey, your thoughts, they matter. Your feelings matter. Your interests matter. They are important. And you're letting your actions speak louder than your words when you let them pursue their interests in this way. So now there's a man, his name is John Taylor Gatto, and he was the New York State Teacher of the Year in 1991. He wrote a phenomenal book. Go pick it up right away. It's called Dumbing Us Down. There's a link on my website if you want to check it out too. But wherever you get it, just read it. It's phenomenal. Now, he gave a speech when he got this award, and he talked about what he does as a teacher. And he said this: of the millions of things of value to study, I decide what few we have time for. Actually, though, this is decided by my faceless employers. The choices are theirs. Why should I argue? Curiosity has no important place in my work, only conformity. Now, I think this is just, so true. There are millions of things of value to study. There are so many valuable things worthwhile to pursue. So why not let your children decide which one of those valuable things to study that he or she wants to? Because we only have time for so many things. So why not let them have the freedom to choose in that way? And again, realize that you cannot force learning and understanding. It gets back to that language study. It doesn't matter. You can sit someone in a classroom for hours and hours and give them all sorts of punishments or threats and make them do exercises and workbooks and sit in lectures. You cannot force them to understand what you're saying. That is something that comes from within. Okay, so some people, they look at this and they go, well, we have to make kids do these things, when in reality, it is always their choice. You may have induced enough fear in them that they chose to do it, but it's always their choice because you cannot force learning or understanding. So when we allow them to pursue their interests in this way, we are nurturing their intrinsic motivation to learn. Because human beings rather, they love to learn. Think about a newborn baby. They want to learn. No one is making them or forcing them to learn how to walk or talk. They're just observing the world and learning, right? They decide that they're gonna walk, right? Now, remember that kids learn different things at different times in different ways. Now, kids learn to walk at different times. Some kids, 6 months old, they're walking. Some kids at a year old, they're walking. Some kids at 18 months old, they're just starting to walk, okay? But they all learn to walk. And no one had to force them to do it, right? Even though it was hard and it hurt, because I tell you, watching my kids walk, sometimes it's a painful experience. They get up and they fall down and they fall down and they cry, but they keep going because we naturally want to learn. Kids want to learn. I think about parents, and some of them, are struggling with the idea of homeschooling, right? And they wonder, how can I teach my kids? And, think about how much a child has already learned before they've gone to kindergarten. They've learned the names of several places and people, and they can recite to you stories in detail. They can sing you songs they've memorized. Most of them know how to count a great deal. Most of them know shapes and colors. Most of them know the alphabet. Many of them know how to write their own name. They know so much about the world around them. They know how to work iPads and cell phones and different machines. They know how to do tasks around the house. They understand cultural norms. They have just, their minds have just learned so much. And who facilitated all this learning? You did. Parents have facilitated all this learning in their home. They didn't need schools to teach these things to their children. These are things they all learned before they started going to school. And that learning can continue and can multiply over the years, right? So, parents, sometimes they don't feel confident in their ability, but, you've already done so much. Someone once said to me, we teach our kids how to tie their shoes, right? Now we're just going to teach them how to add or subtract, and because your children internally have this intrinsic motivation to learn. And when you can nurture this, suddenly there's no more need for grades. You don't need stickers, you don't need prizes, you don't need honor roll certificates, you don't need trophies or punishments. These things, they're not needed anymore because your child wants to learn for themselves, right? Because they naturally want to learn. Now, when I talk about allowing our kids to pursue their own interests, what I'm not saying is neglecting different subjects. What I'm not saying is that learning to read isn't important, or learning math isn't important, because reading is extremely important. Mathematics is extremely important. I want my children to understand history and geography, But what I'm talking about is allowing them to learn these things in a new context, allowing them to learn in a way that's meaningful to them, that's engaging to them, rather than doing it into these broken up, isolated subjects where now we're going to sit down and we're going to learn math, and now we're going to sit down and we're going to learn geography, when it's not meaningful to them and they're not interested in it. But rather teaching them in a way that's relevant and engaging, and where they can become these self-directed learners. Now, people have some concerns with this kind of learning. They ask themselves, what about gaps in learning, state standards? My kids don't have any interests, or what if my child never wants to read? So let me ease your mind a bit. So, does your child seem to lack interest? I would ask you, how are you modeling a curious mind? What interests are you pursuing? Do your children see that you have a genuine interest in things? Because you are going to be the single greatest influencer in your young child's life. So if you can model for them that you have a curious mind, that you go after interests, and you're, curious about things, they're going to pick up on that and they're going to follow that example. What if my child doesn't want to learn to read? I would ask you, why wouldn't he or she want to read? And remember that everyone learns to read at different times. Just like that child learns to walk at different times, kids learn to read at different times. Some kids learn at 3 years old, some kids learn at 5, some kids learn at 7 or 8, but they all learn to read, right? And most people aren't going around like, hey, how old were you when you learned to read? Well, I was 3 years old, But your kids are all going to learn, because why wouldn't they want to learn? Just like that baby looks around and sees that everyone around them is walking, and that they can become far more independent by doing so, your child, and any healthy child, is going to be able to look around and realize that everyone around me is reading. I have a limitation here because I can't read. So I'm being dependent on people around me. If I want to gain more independence, then I need to learn how to read. And what you can do is show them how reading, or any other subject for that matter, can help them do more with their interests. So if your son or daughter is really into dinosaurs, help them to see how if they learn to read, they can do so much more with dinosaurs. My husband came home and he was thinking about starting a new business. And my daughter's like, I want to help, I want to help. And he sat her down, he said, I would love for you to help me. But what you need to do is, if you can learn how to read, I'm going to have so many jobs you can help me with. But until you learn how to read, there isn't that much you can help me with. And that was the truth, And suddenly she was so much more motivated to read. It was that intrinsic motivation. We didn't have to give her a prize or a sticker or threaten her. She wanted to learn. Now, there's a question of state standards. Now, it's really important to understand the homeschooling laws in your area and realize that it's really only in schools that things are isolated into these distinct subjects, because real life is multidisciplinary. Throughout the day, I don't sit down and exclusively do math and exclusively think about religion or exclusively think about history or exclusively think about reading or writing. These are all things are intertwined in real life. When I'm cooking, I am doing, arithmetic. I am doubling the recipe. I'm cutting recipes in half. I'm thinking about fractions. I'm reading labels. Maybe I'm looking up different countries. I've been thinking about personal experience. I've been wanting to eat more fruits and vegetables. And I thought, how do people eat fruits and vegetables in other countries? To give myself some variety of flavor. So here, that's a way I can incorporate more reading and more geography and history and, cultural awareness. Because real life is multidisciplinary. It's only in schools that we have these artificial, isolated subjects, okay? So when you allow your child to pursue their interests, they're still going to cover these state standards, okay? Now, then there's a question of gaps in knowledge. What if my kid grows up and they leave the house and they were never interested in, the Declaration of Independence and they never learned what year it was signed? They need to know this, okay? So some of you may be thinking that. And so my first question would be, why wouldn't they be interested in it? We celebrate, the 4th of July every year, but let's say they never became interested in it and you feel like it's very important for them to know. What I want to say to you is that right now we live in a very unique time in human history. We live in what's called the information age. There's never been a time like this before. This is a really unique time where the vast majority of adults all have a little device in their pockets, a cell phone, and within seconds they can pull that cell phone out and go on the internet and ask Google a question, and in a half a second you're going to get 10,000 answers to that question or more. Okay? So schools were created at a different period in human history. When schools were created, this knowledge and information wasn't as accessible as it is now. And so they were teaching in a way that was completely different. They were putting so much emphasis on these facts and figures and learning and memorizing these things that aren't as needed anymore. Because, if my children get in a situation where they need to know what year the Declaration of Independence was signed, all they have to do is pull out their phone. Within seconds, they know it. Right? Now, this hasn't hindered their life very much because now they have the information and they can move on. Now, what is concerning, though, is gaps in character. Because if I've spent all my time trying to force them to memorize these facts and figures that in an instant they can know when they actually need to know it, and I've neglected their character, that is very concerning. Because if my child is lacking in integrity, or they're lacking in self-confidence, in compassion, or honesty, these are not things that in a half a second Google is going to be able to fix for them. These are things that have to be developed over time. And as a homeschooler, you have the really unique opportunity to put more emphasis on that and help develop that culture. Because, developing things like work ethic and grit and good social skills, being relatable to people, these are so important in helping them to be successful in life. Far more than having, lots of, being able to do well in a trivia test or a trivia game, knowing all these random facts and figures. But if they can relate to people, if they know how to learn, if they have a strong work ethic, they're going to be able to do so much more. So remember to focus on a love of learning and how to learn. And that we can teach ourselves really quickly when we need to know something or desire to know something. And to focus on progression and not speed, okay? So, just make sure your kids are continuing to learn little by little. They might not be learning as quickly as the girl next door or something, but as long as they're a little bit better today than they were yesterday, they're farther along this year than they were last year, that's what's important. Remember, we don't need to keep comparing our children to other people. Also, when your children turn 18 and they leave your home, they will not know everything there is to know. You cannot do this. Public schools cannot do this. Private schools cannot do this. Montessori schools don't do this. Nobody. And that is okay because there's so much to learn in this world. They're going to leave your home and there are going to be things that they don't know, and they don't need to be embarrassed by that because you can only learn so much in 18 years. And we don't want our kids to stop learning. So many people have this idea that, after high school, after college, boom, my education, it's done. I did it. And we don't want that for our children. I'm not saying we don't want them to go to college, because if that's their desire, that might be really good for them. But what I'm saying is we don't want them to think that they're going to get to a certain point in their life where their learning has ended. Okay? Because we want them to learn throughout their life. There's a lifetime worth of things to discover and to learn. There are going to be jobs and problems in the future that our kids are going to have to solve that have never been in our lives. The questions that we've never been faced with. And so we want them to keep learning throughout their lives. Because if you can have a child who loves to learn, who knows how to learn, who has a strong work ethic, they're going to be able to get so much farther in life. So many people after college, they stop reading books. There's no reason to stop reading books. We want our children to continue to learn. Now, there's this pervading myth in schools, and that is that explicit knowledge is paramount. That explicit knowledge, that's like this fact and figure knowledge, information that Google can tell you in half a second, and so much emphasis is put on that despite us being in this information age. But we need to recognize, where we are in history, and that explicit knowledge isn't bad, but it's not paramount. It's not the most important thing ever. And part of the reason why our schools do it this way, and they focus the majority of their school day on getting our children to memorize explicit knowledge, is because it's easily accessible. It's very easy to test things like when was the Declaration of Independence signed? That is very easy to test. Things like how much work ethic have you developed? Your self-confidence or deeper understanding of a subject are a lot harder to test than, a multiple choice question, okay? Now, Mitch Resnick from the MIT Media Lab, which is, a very interesting place, it's so unique. He said, today's education systems are not designed to help people develop as creative thinkers. It is ironic and distressing that at the same time that machines are increasingly taking over workplace tasks that don't require any unique human abilities, our education systems continue to push children to think and act like machines. We need to stop training students for exams that computers can pass. This is so important because it's happening. Computers are increasingly taking over the workplace, right? And yet we're continuing to push our children to think and act like computers, when what we need to do is help develop those unique human abilities, right? Help develop those creative thinking skills, okay? Help them to become entrepreneurs, help them to become, thought leaders, help them to develop these unique human abilities so that when they come out in the world, they have really meaningful things to offer. and that they aren't competing with a computer, because Google is going to outdo you every time. There's no way you're going to be able to produce, 20,000 answers in half a second to a question like a computer can. But there are unique human things that you can develop, that you can do that computers can't do. That, a computer cannot replace my job, right? So there are 3 kinds of learning. There's learning to be, learning to do, and learning to know. Now, these 3 kinds of learning were introduced to me in a book called Unschooling Rules by Clark Aldrich, which I highly recommend. Now, learning to be, this is learning about yourself. What gives you energy? What unique talents do you have? What brings you joy? Okay? Learning, and this is really important because I'm telling you, some people, young people, they leave college and they don't know about themselves. Okay? They haven't discovered who they are. And then there's learning to do. These are skills things. Learning to play piano, leadership skills, learning how to build a house. These are skills that you learn. And then there's learning to know, which is that explicit knowledge. Now, all of these things are really important, but unfortunately, schools put such a strong emphasis on learning to know and often neglect learning to do and learning to be. But as a homeschooler, you have the opportunity to balance that out, okay? Okay, man, there's so much more I want to share with you. I just love talking about these subjects with you, but we are just running out of time. And so what I did was I designed a course, and I designed it just for you. And it's Joyfully and Natural Learning, and it's a complete guide to providing your child with a joyful and natural education. So let me tell you about what's inside. So in it, you're going to discover the 7 fundamental steps to creating a natural and joyful educational experience for your young child. Because like I said, this letting your child pursue their interests, I'm just starting to dig into one of the steps. There's more to this one, and there are 6 others that I want to teach you about so that you can do this for your children. You're going to learn how to educate your children without imitating school. This course is going to show you how to facilitate learning without the constraints of predetermined curriculum, testing, grade levels, and compulsion. I want you to be able to make learning joyful and designed to complement your child's unique learning process. So after years of study and experience, what I've done is I've cut through the fluff to determine the 7 most crucial steps that you need to give your child a phenomenal education. This course is concise because I want to get you to where you are right now, from where you are right now to where you want to go in the shortest amount of time possible. If you have questions about how you can implement some of these things we talked about, this course is for you. So in it, you're going to find the 7 steps. We're going to talk about homeschooling laws, having a big picture and vision for your home education. I'm going to give you book lists, there are video presentations, documents, a special bonus just for students of the course, and so much more. This is exactly what I would have yearned for, 7 years ago when I first started my homeschooling journey. Someone to walk me through what I need to do. So a lot of things hold people back from homeschooling. They don't have help. It's a big deal. They don't want to get it wrong. They feel alone. They don't have a guide. They don't have a mentor. They're scared. They don't know where to start. These things don't have to hold you back anymore. Now, you don't have to scour the internet for countless hours, searching desperately for someone to guide you on this new journey. You won't mistakenly waste hundreds or thousands of dollars on a one-size-fits-all curriculum. You don't have to read blog after blog in an attempt to find out what is of worth and what isn't. You can stop thinking about educating your child at home, and instead you can step confidently into a new fulfilling lifestyle with your family. You can learn from a step-by-step guide how to give your child a phenomenal education right now. You can offer your child an education that is natural and fills your home with joy. With this opportunity that I have with you today. Because I want you to spend more time with your kids. I want your children to have joy in learning. I want them to be more concerned about learning than about grades. I want them to learn in a way that complements their natural learning process. And for you to be able to provide them with a customized educational experience and to guide them and help them discover their unique mission in life. So here's the investment. There's the basic package. Now, in this package, you're going to receive the full Joyful and Natural Learning course. In that are the 7 key principles to a joyful and natural education. You're going to get videos, presentations, documents, more. You're going to have that special bonus about an exciting upcoming community. Plus, just for being on this webinar, I have provided tips and reflection sheets. Now, this is going to help you just to dig into each of these 7 principles even further, okay? Now, this is a limited type bonus, and it's only available for those who enroll in the next 24 hours. So if this is for you, get on this right away, because I want you to have these reflection pages to really, go the next level in your learning with me. So this package is going to give you everything you need to get started right away. Now, I have just put my heart and soul into it, my blood, sweat, and tears, after years of study and just learning and trying to break it all down for you into the step-by-step guide. You're going to get all of this for only $247. Just all this work and this passion for $247. Now, I also have a premium package because I was thinking, I was trying to put myself back where I was 7 years ago. What would I have really wanted? This course would have been, just meant so much to me. But I thought, what if I could have someone personally walk me through it? So this premium package, space is limited. So if this is for you, get on it right away. You're going to get everything in the basic package, plus 4 one-hour mentoring sessions with myself. We're going to meet one-on-one via Google Hangout. I'm going to personally guide you through the course. If there will be, I'll be there to answer any specific questions you have and to help you apply the course to your unique family. I am going to be your personal mentor. Okay? So space is limited because I homeschool my children and I only have so much time. But I really knew that I wanted to offer people something to really help them. And I knew that if I could give some of my time to them and walk them through this course, that's going to be really meaningful for some people. So if this is for you, you're going to get all that for only $11.97. Okay? So next, what we're going to do is we're going to take some of your questions. So I want you to think about, what questions you have that I can answer for you. It might be questions about the course. It might be questions about home education itself. So start thinking about that. And you can get this now. You can get started right away. Plus, there is a 14-day money-back guarantee. So, there's no risk to this. So you can copy and paste those links, or what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a link on this Hangout as well, and I'll show you that here in just a second. All right. Okay, awesome. So what you want to do is up at the top corner, there's going to be what looks like kind of a Rubik's Cube, okay? So there's going to be a bunch of little white squares, like 3 by 3. So if you click on that, one's going to say Q&A. So all you got to do is click on that, and you're going to be able to put in any questions that you might have. So I want you to pull that up, and I want to read to you a question of a student who, someone who couldn't be here today. They had a question, and I'm going to answer that while you guys are putting up your own. So give me just a second. Okay, so they wanted suggestions on how to homeschool one child the age of 5 while there's another child the age of 2 at home. She said, I imagine that the school parts, literacy and math, could occur in 10 or 15-minute chunks. So perhaps it can be squeezed into time when the little one is occupied. But I don't know how important routine and structure are, doing the same things at the same time every day. They're not super great at structure. Okay, so while you guys are putting your questions in, let me address some things with that one. So, how to get it all done. So I showed you pictures of my family. So I have, one little girl and who I'm more actively homeschooling, and then I have a 2-year-old and a newborn. And so I totally get it, right? Sometimes, the 2-year-old's screaming, the baby needs to be fed, and it's hard to get it all done. So what I would recommend is, by taking this approach to joyful and natural learning that I'm talking about, learning happens naturally. So you don't have that much sit down, we're going to do this kind of workbook instruction. Now, your child may be interested in that. My kid, as a family, we want to learn Spanish. And so she's really interested in learning Spanish. And so one way we are doing that is by doing a program called Duolingo. And so she's really interested in it. And so it's a free Spanish learning program. And so we sit down and we do it together, right? And sometimes it's hard and with the 2-year-old because she's come in and she wants to be involved. And so one thing that we do is we try and get her involved as much as we possibly can. And I try to do this in all sorts of things. If we're playing a math game, or any game, that I found tons of games involve math, I let her be my dice roller, or I let her pick up the card for me, or I let her move my piece. And I try to get her involved as much as I can, because that, helps there to be peace. My kid can get what they need from it, and the toddler is able to participate, and she's feeling happy, and she's picking up on really important things as well. Also, you can use things like nap times. My 2-year-old still naps, and even if she isn't napping, sometimes we just have quiet time where she just sits in her room and she has some quiet time. Sometimes she'll fall asleep, sometimes she doesn't. This can be a really great time to get in some of that instruction that you may want to do without all the distraction that the 2-year-old or the baby might have, right, if you have a baby like I do. So nap times are great, and trying to get them involved, or like you said, get them occupied. Maybe you could have something for them to do that isn't always there. For instance, maybe you have special sensory activity. Maybe you have a bin full of different kinds of Play-Doh, and it's only for this special time for when you're working with your other child. And so they can be playing with this Play-Doh, and it's kind of novel, so it kind of keeps them interested longer, and maybe they're listening to an audiobook or something like that to kind of keep them engaged while you can be working on Spanish with your kid or whatever it is that you want to be working on without some of that distraction. Also, the idea of routine and scheduling and structure. So this is really common, and this is something that I do go into in the course in even further detail, but I want to give you some basis. So, structure is great. Kids need some sort of stability because it does help them, and it helps them to feel safe, right? And so what I found is you don't need a lot of arbitrary structure. Sometimes schools, we get this idea that you need structure, like schools have structure, where it's kind of more this micromanaging, okay? But I found that naturally your days kind of develop structure. So, you might wake up. When you wake up in the morning, then you eat breakfast as a family, and then you have lunch, and you have dinner, and you have bedtime, and things kind of just flow. Now, this is really interesting question, because right now, after I just had a newborn baby, schedules get out of whack, right? Right after the baby comes, you're not sleeping at night, and you're trying to take naps during the day whenever you can. And so right now, I'm also in a position where I'm trying to regain some of that structure and get that rhythm going in our day to help our days go smoothly. Now, I think, that's great to have some structure in your day. And maybe, after breakfast, you have a family read aloud time. And then you're letting them pick a book that they're interested in, and you're talking about it and you're learning about it, and then you let them have some free play. Or maybe if your child's like mine, they're really interested in piano, and that's something they want to pursue, and I'm trying to help them to do. And so maybe after your family read aloud, then you practice piano. And you're going to have these spontaneous learning opportunities come up as well that I go into in my course, where you might be reading a book, and then suddenly it leads to a new question, which leads to a new question, which leads to a new question, and you're going to do all of this learning, and it's just kind of really spontaneous, and it's really this beautiful, natural thing, and your kids are going to be engaged and learning so much. So you don't have to so much structure all of your content, but just structure your day and have these spaces where you can allow this natural learning to really flourish in a really meaningful way, because they're going to learn naturally all the time, but I have these spaces where they're going to be able to pursue their interests in a really meaningful way. Okay, so I'm not seeing a lot of other questions. So what I'm going to do here is, if you click on that Rubik's Cube again, you are going to see what looks like some of these yellow tags, and it's going to say showcase. And so on the side, what you're going to do is you're going to see some links. So the first link is a link to my blog, because I blog and I podcast about these things. So you're going to be able to check out and get lots of free information there. Now, under that, you're going to see links to the courses. So the basic package and the premium package. So you can click on that, and I just want to thank you so much for spending this time with me. And I tried to just pack this full of so much value for you. So if you found this valuable, please invite your friends to come on the next webinar. You can come back if you have more questions or want to go through this again, and really just spread the word, because I want to help as many parents as I can, because I have felt the joy that this can bring to my life, and I want other parents to feel that as well. And some parents, they just don't know any other way. Like me, I didn't know there was any other way. And I want to help teach them. So thank you so much for coming. Like I said, please share this webinar. Enroll right away into those courses. And if you enroll in the next 24 hours, you're going to get that special bonus of those reflection sheets. So thank you so much for joining me. All right, bye guys.